All right, so I'm gonna do a deep dive here into the recent face-off interview that dropped on the Zone between Filip Hrgovic and Itauma. Obviously, they have their big fight, which is now for the IBF heavyweight title. A big fight for me, the fight of the month in August. I will be there in the UK. It'll be my first time going to a fight in the UK. It'll be my second time in the UK overall. Really excited about it. Looking forward to meeting the British viewers of this channel and just British fans in general. So if you see a boy BT at the fights in the UK, definitely go ahead, say what's up, holla at me, and I'll definitely stop and talk. But let's talk about it because there are so many things that were said in this interview on both sides between Itauma and Filip Hrgovic that I wanted to dissect and break down as we build closer and closer towards the fight. So let's talk about it because there's a lot to get through. Get your popcorn, go get a snack, put your phone on mute, block someone who keeps calling your phone because this might be a bit of a long one here on True School Sports. But nonetheless, we'll start off from the beginning. So the beginning of the sit down interview between Itauma and Hrgovic, it begins and a lot of people didn't catch this, and I thought it was clear bias shown from Adam Smith as he called Filip Hrgovic, and I quote, the best 3-round heavyweight in the world in terms of his power and things like that. Now look, I never met Adam Smith. I don't feel any way towards him, but man, that he's really showing his Union Jack British flag, trying to put down Filip Hrgovic, telling him that he's the best 3-round heavyweight in the world. That's bullshit. But we'll leave it there. Filip Hrgovic then says he's not impressed with Moses due to not seeing him go through any adversity in receiving punches. Now, one could argue that, okay, well, he hasn't received any adversity because he's just been that good. He's just been that so much better than the guys he's fought. He showed that he's a level above the guys he's fought, including Dempsey McKean, whom Filip Hrgovic went about 11 or 12 rounds with before he ultimately stopped him. So there's something to be said about that. On the flip side, and I really feel like this is not being talked about enough. This is not being talked about enough in the midst of the fact that Moses has the Queensberry machine behind him, and people are buying the hype of Moses. Which, by the way, Moses is a phenomenal talent. I like Moses Itauma, and to a degree, I do buy the hype of Moses Itauma. But it has not been stated enough that really and truthfully, when we talk about the world class, the big leagues of the heavyweight division, Moses has fought this many top flight heavyweights. That's just the truth of it. So, if Filip Hrgovic is worth his weight in salt, he will be the guy to ultimately test Moses Itauma in his, in his ability to handle or not handle adversity. So things really began to heat up after that because Filip Hrgovic speaks to a greater point here. He stated that Moses has gotten privilege due to being from the UK and having the boxing industry push him. Hrgovic never got that push because he's from a small, non-traditional boxing country in Croatia. And, to Hrgovic's point, I think from his vantage point, he does have a point because, this is a guy that damn near the whole IBF ducked him before he even got the Zhang fight. There was a lot of, there's been a hard time throughout the duration of his career, especially early on in it, putting together fights that move his career forward. That's why he had inactivity. That's why there were layoffs that shouldn't have been there, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 4 years ago. So, even you could look at this fight with Moses and Hrgovic, which initially started off as a non-world title fight that has been upgraded to a world title fight. Let's not make no bones about it. One of the main reasons it got upgraded to a world title fight is because Moses is a house fighter. He's the fighter that Queensberry's putting the money behind. And if Moses wins, it makes him the second youngest heavyweight champion in the history of boxing behind only the great Mike Tyson. And that, if he's to be able to beat Hrgovic, that fact right there, that's a selling point. That's a way you can market him to not just boxing fans, of course, but the non-boxing fans, the people that don't normally watch boxing. You can say, oh, well, we got this heavyweight. This guy is the youngest heavyweight champion since Mike Tyson. I mean, that'll get people excited. So even in the midst of Filip getting a title shot, I feel like the point he's speaking to actually checks out because Would Moses be getting this title shot if he didn't have Queensberry behind him? If he wasn't this blue chip amateur that had built his reputation in the gyms? I don't think so. So I think that checks out there. Now, Moses, one thing Moses said is that that he's going to exploit Filip Hrgovic's weaknesses, right? But he doesn't necessarily need his speed or his power to exploit Filip Hrgovic's weaknesses. So what that sounds like to me, sounds like Moses is going to be looking to counterpunch Filip Hrgovic. If Filip Hrgovic does do what he's been saying in the build-up to this fight and brings the fight forward to Moses Itauma, Moses, I think, will be looking to sit on the back foot, probe with the jab, let Filip maybe reach a bit and fall in with the right hand, and then once he sees an opening, he's going to use his speed and explosiveness to try to exploit that. That's what it sounds like when you read the quote on the surface, but, we'll see how it goes. Moses also acknowledges that Filip Hrgovic will not back down like previous opponents, because let's be real. The Mike Baloguns, the faded version of Dillian White, the Jermaine Franklins, these are guys that the minute they felt the speed, the pace, and the punching power of Moses Itauma, they shut down and they couldn't do anything with him, right? And so Moses, I think, knows the kind of challenges that he's in for. He knows that even if he is to be victorious against Filip Hrgovic, there's going to be some real resistance put his way, and that he's going to have to go to some places he hasn't been to in his career. And of course, if this fight goes the same way as previous fights like Mike Balogun, like Dillian White, like Jermaine Franklin, of course, you got to acknowledge that Moses Itauma doing that to Hrgovic, a guy that nobody's ever beaten in that fashion, that would be a massive statement and show that he is ready for the big leagues of boxing. And that would also make him now, because of the circumstances of Usyk vacating the title and whatnot, that would make him the IBF heavyweight champion. So, you have that. Then Adam Smith started asking Filip Hrgovic about, the Dubois fight and just reacting to the loss to Dubois. And to that, Filip had pretty much said that he took a whole year out from boxing. That, after the Dubois loss, he was disappointed in himself. And he had acknowledged some sickness going into the fight. Now, the one thing Filip did not mention, and I'll mention it because I remember the last time I physically saw Filip Hrgovic was actually right before the Dubois fight. I have not physically seen Filip Hrgovic since before the Dubois fight. Hopefully I get to see him in the UK when I go there. But Filip Hrgovic acknowledged that he had experienced some sickness, that he wasn't feeling like himself. But one thing he did not acknowledge, and I will acknowledge it here on True School Sports, because I know Filip on a personal level, right? Filip Hrgovic, his lovely wife was pregnant going into that fight, and he had to fly to Croatia just days before the fight. I believe they fought on June 1st or June 2nd of 2024. His daughter was born, I believe, May 24th of 2024. So, that will play a role if you got to go. Because, look, it's your child. How many times are you going to see the birth of your child? And he had his priorities in order, and he went to go see the birth of his daughter. And I think the travel could have played a factor, but of course that's a tough personal decision he made. He had to live with that. You understand? But I know for a fact that this is a factor going into the fight, because I interviewed Filip Hrgovic March 2024. I went to go see him in camp, and Pops, my dad, had brought Filip Hrgovic and his wife some baby clothes for the baby before our interview, and obviously they were happy to receive it as a gift from my dad. So shout out to Pops, class act, the salt of the earth. Who doesn't love Pops? But that definitely was a factor going into the Dubois fight. And truth be told, he lost the fight. Dubois was the stronger man on the night, but I definitely think the headbutts played a factor in the fight. And even then, Dubois still couldn't put him down on his feet, and he had to stop him on his feet. So that says a lot to how tough Filip Hrgovic is. Anyway, Filip then goes on by saying he's going to beat Moses Itauma any way he wants, whether it's on points or whether by knockout. He then goes on by also saying that Moses Itauma is not his toughest fight that he's experienced in his career. Filip Hrgovic acknowledges the Zhili Zhang fight as a tougher fight, as well as his fights in the World Series of Boxing. Now, for context, people will say that's disrespectful. I don't think it's disrespectful, because first and foremost, you got to remember the Filip Hrgovic Zhang fight was initially slated to take place as the co-main event on Canelo Alvarez Dmitry Bivol. The fight wound up getting pushed back to later on in the year because Filip Hrgovic's father passed away right before the Zhang fight. And that's not even factoring in all the guys that ducked Filip Hrgovic and avoided him in the IBF Eliminator before he even got the damn Zhang fight. So he already had some things going on from that aspect. Then his dad dies. And just so you guys know, the way I am with my dad, with Pops on this channel and in life, that's how Filip was with his dad. He had a very good relationship with his dad. And so, of course, I think that's anytime you lose a family member that close to you going into a tough fight against a big puncher like Zhang, that should be, a difficult fight. But even under those difficult circumstances, he still found a way to win, right? And then as far as the World Series of Boxing, I mean, he was the only person from Croatia. He had the pressure of being from a small country on his shoulders, fighting guys like Joe Joyce and things like that. So I can see why he feels that way. But yeah, anyway, Moses responded to that by saying that he is happy that Hrgovic feels that way and says that Filip is following the same script as all his previous opponents. Because a lot of Moses' opponents, they downplay him because they say, oh, well, this kid's too young. He's a product of the British hype machine and the Queensborough hype machine and things like that. And he believes that Hrgovic is no different, right? That Filip isn't saying anything that hasn't already been said to him before. And to be fair, those are things that every Moses opponent does say to him. So there was that. And then Moses started talking about chins and durability and stated that Filip should not be praised for having a great chin. Because Filip says that having a great chin is an important part to be a great fighter. And that you must have one to be a great fighter. And I actually agree with Filip because look at Floyd Mayweather, probably the best defensive fighter of our lifetime. And even in his career against Maidana and Zab Judah and Mosley, he had to show a chin and grit and determination, right? And with all due respect to Moses and pretty much everybody else in the sport fighting right now, ain't nobody better than Floyd Mayweather. So if his chin got tested, you bet your bottom dollar your ass is gonna get tested too. And it is one of the ingredients of a great fighter. Now, personally, I don't think it's the most important thing, but I think it's definitely in the top three. You look at a lot of fighters like Jorge Linares and Amir Khan, guys who had many times in their career had superior skills to their opponents, but lost to lesser skilled fighters because they couldn't take a punch, because they didn't have the durability. So it is an ingredient to be a good fighter. But I also do think, and I can compartmentalize that two things can be true. You don't want to overly test your chin, but when the moment comes, you better have that in your toolbox, right? You better be able to have that durability to take a punch. You understand? So there's that. And then Filip Hrgovic acknowledged that the only concern for him going into this fight is the cuts. Him getting a cut early in the fight, which I have concern about for him. Moses punches very fast, sharp, and precise. Filip has always cut relatively frequently in his fights. So I think that's an honest assessment. And the best way to get around that is to control the range and not allow Moses to explode in the middle or on the inside early in the fight. Control the spacing of the fight. Moses then talked about how I guess he was having a conversation with Richard Riakporhe, and he had asked Richard Riakporhe, the cruiserweight, how do you get a chin like GGG? And to that, Riakporhe told Moses that it's best to not find out. To that, Filip said, who the hell is Richard Riakporhe to speak about Gennady Golovkin? He's not that caliber of fighter, so how could he speak about, having a chin like Golovkin when he's not that? Which, I think is a fair point. One thing about Filip, guys, you could say whatever you want about him in the ring, but when it comes to like his interviews and things that he says, he's very straightforward, no nonsense. Sometimes things are tongue in cheek, but he's very, very honest about himself and about others. So that's one thing I can't say about him. Filip then went on by saying that Moses has fought nobody, which I think at the world-class level is absolutely true, and not enough people are acknowledging it. And he gives him absolutely, positively not 1 ounce of respect for what he's done to his career. And I think, what? That's what we need to do. We need to do that. Why would you as a man, especially when you accomplish what Filip Hrgovic has accomplished coming from fucking Croatia of all places, you medaled in the Olympics, been one of the top heavyweights in the world for a long time. why would you overly respect this young man? Boxing is a sport where respect is not given, it's earned in the squared circle. So if Moses wants to earn his respect, he best go earn it come August 29th. And you know what? To Moses' credit, he's saying, you know what? If you don't want to give me my respect now, I'm going to force you to give me my respect come August 29th. And I do feel like from a mental standpoint, just watching how Moses is reacting and hearing the tone of his voice, I do think, these things are getting to Moses. Now, whether or not that will be a good thing for Hrgovic or a bad thing for Hrgovic, we shall see. But I do think they are getting into his psyche. So we'll see. We're going to find out this fight, Moses' psychological and mental toughness, because Hrgovic is going to pick and prod him mentally. And it's up to Moses to stay cool, calm, collected, and deal with that. And then ultimately deal with them in the ring come August 29th. Then things got really spicy. Things got really, really spicy when Moses had got pissed off about Filip downplaying his opponents in his career up to this point, and said that Filip, that Moses was 20 years old and Filip was boxing on his undercard, kind of saying, you know what, you an undercard fighter, you weren't good enough to even be above me on the show. And that's when Filip ultimately threw probably the best and most piercing verbal counterpunch of the whole entire exchange. He said, and I quote, he said, if Moses didn't come from the UK, because for those that don't know, for those that know, and for those that don't know, Moses is not originally from the UK. I believe he's of Nigerian descent, and he was born in Slovakia. So ironically, this is a battle of two Balkans fighting each other. But he was born in Slovakia. His family migrated to the UK when he was very, very young. And Filip let him know that, hey, if you were still in Slovakia, like I was in Croatia, you wouldn't have gotten fast-tracked and been the beneficiary of the UK boxing machine, because UK is one of the hotbeds of boxing. Let's not kid ourselves. And that's probably true. I mean, forget Hrgovic for a second. Look at a guy like Aji Kabayel. Look how long it took him to get to where he's at. And he was a contender for years, but couldn't get no looks because he's from Germany. And Germany doesn't really produce that many fighters. So there is truth into what he's saying, but there is also truth in the fact that Moses is one of the most talented amateurs the heavyweight division has seen in a long time. And he got this reputation from beating the shit out of the guys like Lawrence Okoli and Tyson Fury in the gyms in England, going to war with these guys and doing his thing, more than holding his own. And then Filip doubles down and says that he gives Moses absolutely, positively no props. And Moses says, okay, we're going to see in the ring, right? So Filip says to Moses that if he is to beat him, if Moses beats Hrgovic the way that he's been beating all these other guys, he will shake his hand and give him respect, but he doesn't believe it. And he's looking for him to come show him that August 29th. And in very stoic fashion, to end the whole exchange, Moses tells Filip that he's just going to beat him. There you go. So a lot to take from this. A lot to take from this. I think Filip Hrgovic is psychologically one of the most intelligent heavyweights in the division, not just in terms of how he handles adversity, but also how he's able to, get into the head of his opponents. You understand? Filip Hrgovic, and you guys may not believe this, but I like I said, I know Filip on a personal level. Filip is delusional. He really thinks that he's better than Moses. He thinks that if he would have fought Usyk, he would have beat Usyk. He thinks that if he would have fought AJ, and if he would have beat Dubois, and then fought AJ, that he would have beat the shit out of AJ. Because I've had these conversations with Filip Hrgovic on camera and off camera. And, he really feels like that, you guys being the public and the boxing fans, have missed out all these years on a great heavyweight fighter. So, when he says all these things, I believe that he believes these things. Now, there are some things we got to acknowledge about Filip Hrgovic. Now, is he being completely real about the Dubois fight? I don't know. Like, I know he had his issues. I was there. I mean, I saw his wife pregnant. I know he went to Croatia to go see his wife when she gave birth. And that obviously could have played a role. But has he fully been real about what happened in the Dubois fight? I know that there were a lot of headbutts, and he's made light of that in a couple interviews, and people have made light of it in my comment section before. But has he really went about, and we won't know this till fight night, but has he really went through the proper channels of being able to prevent those kind of things? If Moses closed the gap, because remember, it's an orthodox versus southpaw matchup. If Moses closes the gap on Filip Hrgovic and gets on the inside, will Filip Hrgovic be able to know how to evade a head clash, to open up a cut? How will he deal with the speed? These are all questions that he has to answer. And also, too, for a guy that's been so experienced in his career, Filip Hrgovic, for the most of his career, I would say, has been overly reliant upon his right hand. Now, he's been fighting better behind the jab with Abel Sanchez, but he's never had to fight behind the jab with a guy like Moses Itauma, who's a southpaw, who can get under it. And he's going to need to do that to set up his money punch, which is the right hand, which is ultimately the southpaw killer. So you have that. And then for Moses, let's be real when it comes to Moses, man. Yes, we know I'm sure he's gone through his struggles. There's rumblings and things that I hear about Moses that have nothing to do with boxing that I'm not going to put out here, but like things that he's went through in his life. There's things about Moses in terms of, what he's done in the gym that I know are true. But like I said, man, he ain't really been introduced to big time heavyweight boxing, and everyone's telling you you're great. From all the reports I get back from people that know Moses in the UK, what they tell me about Moses is that he's one of these guys that just literally eats, drinks, sleeps, shits boxing. Like, he's not getting caught up with the girls. He's not getting caught up, in the ends, as the Brits would say. He's not. He's just dialed in. He's single-minded in his commitment, and that's the main thing that you need in boxing to be successful, is a single-minded commitment. Because boxing is like a jealous girlfriend, and it will come back at you and bite you in your ass if you don't give it all your time, love, and devotion. So, from the outside looking in, Moses strikes me as a very serious young man, a very talented young man, and a man who knows his destiny. And so, I think this fight's happening at such a great time for the boxing fans, because you have a guy, Hrgovic, who's not going to back down, who legitimately believes in his heart of hearts. And I'm telling you guys, it's not as an assertion, as something I genuinely know, because I know him on a personal level. He really believes he's the best heavyweight in the world, and that none of these guys can fuck with him. And he really does believe that the Dubois fight was just a microcosm of not one thing going wrong, but like 10 things going wrong, right? Which nobody wants to hear is an excuse, but he does believe he's going to show his best level, and that experience did get him ready for this moment. And so he's beating Moses at a time where Filip knows it's now or never. He's got to become champion now, or odds are it's never going to happen. And that creates a desperate fighter. That creates a fighter that will die in that ring. You understand? To become the first Croatian heavyweight champion and achieve his destiny and achieve his glory. And then on the other side, you got a man who is being pegged by the world, by the boxing world, as not just a phenomenal talent, but the next great British heavyweight in the lineage of, Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, Lennox Lewis, and just, those guys, all the guys that came before him. The next great heavyweight in boxing, point blank, period. So this is supposed to be a coronation for Moses. This is supposed to be the beginning of the impending Moses Itauma era in heavyweight boxing. And my thing is this, man. So if Hrgovic does take these punches from Moses and Moses gets hit back and gets hurt, this is where I think all the hype can become a dangerous thing for a young man like him. Because now, you for the first time, you're really beginning to have questions asked about yourself. And a loss here for Moses, I do think, will be catastrophic, because you see it in football and in soccer all the time with an English national team, how harsh the British media is towards their athletes and how fast they can turn on them. You guys think the American media is tough on athletes. The British media, I think, is among the toughest and most miserable in the world. And you could bet your ass and bet your bottom dollar, if Moses does not come through this fight and he gets stopped and gets his heart snatched in the UK, or if he loses this fight by any circumstances, the British media will treat him the way they treated the English national team when they choked the lead of Argentina in the World Cup semifinal. So just make note of that. And if Hrgovic loses, I don't think anybody's gonna really like Hrgovic is in an interesting position, because even though he's the more experienced guy, he's the older guy, he's a more mature fighter, he's the guy that's playing with house money. Nobody's really expecting him to win. Nobody's giving him. Very few people are giving him a true fair shot at Moses. And if he loses, no one's gonna really demean him, because like he's expected to lose and make the numbers up. So really, he can go out. He can kind of go out there and just be free. All the pressure's on Moses to perform. So like Ben Davison said many times, pressure, it can burst pipes, or it could be your best friend and create a diamond. And we shall see Is it going to be a rusty pipe for Moses Itauma come August 29th? Or is it going to create that bright, shining diamond in the heavyweight division? Or is Zagreb, Croatia about to have a parade and the party of a lifetime when Filip Hrgovic becomes the first heavyweight champion from the country of Croatia and puts his name amongst the greatest Croatian athletes of all time, like Toni Kukoc and Drazen Petrovic and Mikola Krokop and them kind of guys in other sports, you know? We shall see, and I look forward to being there. So those are my thoughts and my breakdown of the Itauma Hrgovic sit-down interview. More on Itauma and Hrgovic as you get closer. Stay tuned for any and all world-class content here on True School Sports. And let me know what you guys think. And I will see you in the next video.